Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, January 28th, 2022. Time for another show. Time marches on, and I guess so the show does as well. We are back with you live this morning, and Bill's ready for a Friday morning. That's not always available on a Friday morning. Friday's a different schedule for Bill, but I appreciate having a Friday morning tweet today. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Kagro X. Hi, that's me, everybody. Reminds you that there's a blizzard coming. That's true it's certainly true for Bill. And those of you in the northern part of the eastern seaboard, I guess we're getting something. Blizzard conditions will be, where you are. You, Bill, Greg, a couple others, New York City area, I guess we'll have probably larger than usual amount of snow. Anyway, blizzard coming, so make sure you let all the squirrels into your home, feed them, and let them watch their favorite shows on the Gorilla Channel, which they love. So sound advice for what's going on in Portland. Bill, I keep seeing the pictures of you letting the squirrels into the house, which is generous of you, to say the least, but I thought that was interesting. I think we've had a squirrel or two on the back porch here that we've fed with seeds through the summer and the fall, but we only tried to avoid having the guy sneak into the house. But you're a more adventurous fellow than I am. They've never made any trouble for you, so that's good news. And I guess they only come in like when you actually encourage them to do it, or do they try to find their way in on their own? I don't know. At any rate, very nice of you to go ahead and do that. And I've seen you've created a race of super squirrels, chunky super squirrels in Portland. So I guess they'll survive the big blizzard. And they're stocking up, just like the people, everywhere. Even here, I think they're probably clearing the shelves of the usual French toast fixings that apparently melt snow and make it possible to survive the 6 to 12 hours that you can't really go outside. Around here, anyway. That's the way it is with blizzards. Up north, I guess they take it more seriously, as they should. And they're saying that I guess some parts of Massachusetts could be looking at like 2-3 feet of snow. We'll see how it goes. You know how they are with weather predictions. Hope for the best, anyway. So let's see. We'll be keeping an eye on that. There is some breaking news, that is to say, news about things breaking. On the very day that President Biden is scheduled to visit Pittsburgh, if I understood the tweet correctly, to talk infrastructure, there's been a bridge collapse. And the, hurried report on it here in the Washington Post is available. Pittsburgh bridge collapse injures 10 on a day Biden to visit city to talk infrastructure. A Pittsburgh bridge collapsed early Friday, according to authorities, injuring 10 people just hours before the president is scheduled to visit the city to talk about, rebuilding our infrastructure so that our bridges don't collapse. So, of course, I imagine by now Fox News has accused Biden of destroying the bridge, of demoing the bridge on purpose in order to make his point. And he doesn't even care that he injured 10 people. He didn't even bother to tell people. Yeah, so I'm sure the right-wing circles are aflame with that already. Pittsburgh Public Safety acknowledged a, quote, confirmed bridge collapse. I guess that's not hard to confirm. Around 6:50 a.m., a photo from KDKA showed at least 4 vehicles, including a Port Authority bus, on the Fern Hollow Bridge near Forbes and Braddock Avenues, in case you're intimately familiar with the layout of Pittsburgh, which connects the Point Breeze, Regent Square, and Squirrel Hill neighborhoods of Pittsburgh. So squirrels figuring very heavily in the news today. Squirrel Hill, of course, I guess I first became aware of the name of the neighborhood anyway, back in, what was it, a couple of years ago when there was the unfortunate shooting at the synagogue there. I guess apt note to add to the swirling controversy around the fact of Holocaust Remembrance Day yesterday, the banning of mouse in the Tennessee school system. And by the way, I had some more information on that at any rate. All right, so eyes on that, but it looks like everybody, I guess we got away pretty good for a bridge collapse. No fatalities, that's good news. 10 injuries, and we hope for a speedy recovery for everybody there, unless they're Holocaust-denying Nazis, in which case, terrific. I don't know what to tell you. Well, I guess we don't want to necessarily depend on bridge collapses to weed them out from our society. But anyway, I just thought that made an interesting talking point. I'm sure I bring it up because like I said, by the afternoon, there'll be a conspiracy theory about it. All right, well, let's see. It is Friday, so I am here on my own, and just me and the cup of tea here as we struggle to make the choice between taking a sip on air, as we will right now. Let's check this out. Ready? Did I make a big slurpy noise out of it? I don't know. Or carrying on with the show. It's one or the other. However, I do have a break coming to me. I'm aware of this. Thanks to our good friend Darwin Darko, who has sent us another installment, this time on the very interesting topic of, the racial situation, I guess we could say, with coaches in the NFL and the dearth of black head coaches in the NFL. And though they've included on the books some rules, as I understand it from his report, on the aimed at increasing the numbers, some very odd unintended consequences surrounding it. It's an interesting report. I'll hold on to it for just a minute and roll it in a bit, but maybe we'll do it on the early side so the tea is still hot. I wanted to jump back to that controversy about the banning of mouse down in, what was it? I can't remember the name of the county. McMillan County, perhaps. I can't recall now offhand, although I did see it flash by on the screen earlier today. Maybe I can scroll and find it while we're talking. But at any rate, there was an additional piece of information that it's McMinn. There we are, McMinn County School Board. Additional piece of information I wanted to add. I told you about, and I'm still annoyed that this doesn't make a bigger splash, but the mouse is the bigger issue here. And so it's important to focus on that. But I was thinking that people would, get perhaps a better feel for what kind of people we're talking about and what kind of logic is backing up this banning of the book. If, you made a big deal out of pointing out, remember, they're also incensed in the same meeting about the salacious lyrics to the 1921 song I'm Just Wild About Harry, apparently from the Broadway production of Shuffle Along. However, I thought it was interesting. It brought up another interesting point. There is, in fact, or was, historically, some controversy about both the show and the song. Now, neither of those two things are mentioned in the brief discussion about how lewd the song is and how they have to get rid of it. The complaint, as you may recall, is over the inclusion of the word ecstasy and the need to explain it as a vocabulary word for kids. I've been pondering why the lyrics to I'm Just Wild About Harry would appear in a poetry book or as part of a poetry unit for 7th graders at all. And my assumption is, well, okay, lyrics are in many ways similar to poetry and might stand as poetry just as surely as anything else. There's certainly worse poems. And the structure is there, the rhyme is there, that helps kids with poetry as well. And there are a few literary devices that you might be able to use. And I think, though, the idea was to include it because it's so anodyne and inoffensive. And after all, it was noted that Harry Truman had adopted I'm Just Wild About Harry as his official campaign song in 1948. So I think even in 1948, they were pretty sure that song wasn't porny, and they were okay with it. So they probably figured it's a completely harmless set of lyrics to use to illustrate the, various literary devices. I'm just wild about Harry. That doesn't really recall any literary devices being used, but the other lines, the heavenly blisses of his kisses fill me with ecstasy. He's sweet just like chocolate candy and just like honey from the bee. Oh, like or as, it's a simile, right? You see? You get the idea. Very simple stuff. But as it turns out, anyway, there was controversy about the song and the show that is available in the write-up. There is an actual write-up about the song itself, I'm Just Wild About Harry, on Wikipedia. And let me share it with you just because it's interesting and instructive just about, the things that white people, got upset about in this country literally 100 years ago. The song was written in 1921. And let's see, without getting into too much detail, it's written with lyrics, as it says here, by Noble Sissel and music by U.B. Blake for the Broadway show Shuffle Along, which probably you're starting to get the idea. If you know anything about the production of the show and the characters in the show, and now the time period, and the fact that it's called Shuffle Along, okay, you might be starting to get the hint. But if you're not, I'll continue. So I'm Just Wild About Harry was the most popular number in the production, which was the first financially successful Broadway play to have, one, African-American writers and an all-African-American cast. This is amazing. This song broke what had been a taboo against musical and stage depictions of romantic love between African Americans. 1921. Now remember, this is not romantic love between an African American and a white person. It's not an interracial thing, which remained controversial for, still today probably, but remained not only controversial, but, illegal in many states for another, 30 to 40 years. But at any rate, this is a taboo against musical and stage depictions of romantic love between African Americans, grown adults, man and woman, everything, all the traditional stuff that you would think should make it okay. In 1921, it was shocking to white audiences that two adult African Americans might have fully realized adult lives. They were pretty aware that, they're definitely getting married and having children out there. They're doing all the things that humans do. But it was taboo to depict it on stage. That's mind-boggling to me. But I understand that there were such people that were that crazed about issues of race, but I don't know. That was a surprise to me, and I thought I would share it with you. I'll go on. Here's an interesting fact about the song. It was originally written as a waltz, but Blake rewrote the number as a foxtrot at the singer's request. That's interesting. The result was a simple, direct, joyous, and infectious tune enhanced on stage by improvisational dancing. Oh, you know how those African Americans are with their improvisational dancing. There's an actual story about it. But anyway, that's interesting. In 1948, Harry S. Truman selected I'm Just Wild About Harry as his campaign song for the United States presidential election of 1948. I don't know if he read all the lyrics that he would have seen. They say ecstasy. That's filthy. He might have, said, I don't know, I'm not kissing anybody on the show. I'm kissing babies. I guess they were still kissing babies in those days. Which, by the way, now that, that's over with for the most part. But I was just sort of thinking of baby kissing on the campaign trail in the era of COVID. But anyway, it was over long before that. Anyway, its success in politics led to its popular revival. There's some other info about the various people who've recorded it. I mean, it's like I said, not only anodyne lyrics, but I mean, been recorded by Judy Garland, Peggy Lee, I think, in the 50s even, and just, I can't imagine anybody objecting to it. And yet, here we are. So background on this song, might as well eat up the segment with it. Both I'm Just Wild About Harry and the show Shuffle Along broke racial taboos. During the early 20th century, African Americans were excluded from most mainstream theater in the United States. Not terribly surprising given, our segregationist history. But this is interesting, that was entertainment field was one of the few places where African Americans could kind of break through and be seen and appreciated to some extent as performers, if nothing else, by white Americans. But, wow, talk about limited exposure and restrictions. This is also very telling. So, while white vaudeville refused, while they allowed, black performers, they refused to book more than one African-American act on a bill. Like have a vaudeville variety show with 10 acts in it. You couldn't have more than one African-American act. That was a rule. And that too, somewhat astounding. Anyway, that was the case, and for over a decade, no Broadway show used African-American performers at all. Now, Blake and Sissel, the writers here, met F.E. Miller and Aubrey Lyles, other African-American vaudeville performers. They met them for the first time at a fundraising benefit for the NAACP in 1920. Vaudeville's exclusionary practices limited bills to one African-American act per night, so, as a result, the two leading African-American acting teams knew of each other only by reputation. I don't know if that was any part of the intent or the design of the rule, I don't know, but probably more like just a happy accident for the white people who did design the rule, just in terms of like disempowering African-American everybody's, but in this case, entertainers. So there was really no opportunity for them to get together and say, hey, this is terrible and we ought to do something about it, even if they thought that they could succeed with such a thing. That is equally astounding. Anyway, so it goes on. The four performers agreed that the only feasible way for African Americans to return to Broadway with dignity would be musical comedy, which is telling in itself, in other words, I mean, the view of what I guess passed for dignity was necessarily limited as well. They were basically saying, well, they don't want to do it as minstrel shows, but it still has to be musical comedy. It still has to be a comedy, essentially. There can't be drama with fully realized adult African-American characters. They just won't accept that. How astounding. So anyway, Miller proposes that they collaborate. The resulting show adapted a plot and characters from Miller and Aubrey's vaudeville comic sketches with music by Blake and Sissel. Although the music of Shuffle Along, again, now you're maybe starting to get the point of the show. It's the sort of thing that would be a controversial and upsetting title to hang on something that wasn't taking intentional aim at the racial situation of the time these days. Although the music of Shuffle Along was new to the public, only 3 compositions were actually written for the production, and I'm Just Wild About Harry was one of them. And in case you need to be in any Broadway musical trivia contests later on, the others are Bandana Days and Love Will Find a Way. At any rate, the other songs used in the show were material that Blake and Sissel had tried unsuccessfully to sell to Tin Pan Alley. I'm Just Wild About Harry and Love Will Find a Way in particular were politically risky for the era. And a quote here, if anything approaching a love duet was introduced in a musical comedy, it had to be broadly burlesqued, recalled black poet and lyricist James Weldon Johnson. The reason lay in the belief that a love scene between two Negroes, his word for that, right, could not strike a white audience except as ridiculous. Wow. That's kind of a gut punch. It's really kind of upsetting, don't you think? Anyway, let's see. That's from Philip Furia and Michael Lassner. America's Songs, the stories behind the songs of Broadway, Hollywood, and Tin Pan Alley. The title and chorus of the musical's most famous number, Challenge That Taboo, I'm Just Wild About Harry and He's Just Wild About Me, is a clear statement of mutual romantic interest. Cecil and Blake risked the public's rejection by shedding most of the racial stereotypes that had been the norm for theatrical performances. So two, normal, in control of themselves, African-American adults saying that they are in love with one another. And, yeah, I mean, just to check all the boxes, heterosexual, still okay in 1921, right? But yet, no, but not as among African-Americans. It's really kind of astounding. I had no idea. But it's been 100 years. Well, anyway, that's pretty interesting. And by the way, in case you were interested in the showcraft side of it, there's a brief blurb here that says, I'm Just Wild About Harry underwent a complete rewrite during rehearsals and was nearly cut from the show. See, that would have been a mistake. Blake's original version of the song was a Viennese waltz. But according to the authors of America's Songs, performer Lottie G, or Gee, I'm not certain, G-E-E, encouraged rewriting the number as an up-tempo one-step. Blake disliked the suggestion and feared it would ruin his waltz, but capitulated after Cecil agreed with G. Audiences did not respond well to the revised version during earlier performances. Blake was on the verge of dropping the number from the show when a dancer was taken ill and had to be replaced. The understudy was a singer who did not know the steps, so when he was unable to follow the routine, he ignored it and improvised. There's the improvisational dance. America's Songs quotes Cecil's recollection of how the performance saved the song. He dropped out of the line, and with a jive smile and a high-stepping routine of his own, he stopped the show cold. Well, anyway, very interesting and an amazing background to the story, and I don't know. It's just an amazing thing that it could be viewed as politically controversial. Let me read the section about reception here on this one. Shuffle Along was a significant theatrical success that ended more than a decade, although we could call it a decade. You dicks, what are you doing excluding people from the stage? The decade of systemic exclusion of blacks from the Broadway stage. The show opened in New York City at Daley's 63rd Street Music Hall on May 23rd, 1921. It ran for 504 performances. The venue, by the way, of course you get, second choice in all these things, right? The venue was actually a converted lecture hall that lacked a proper stage or orchestra pit. The show overcame financial straits and a poor location to become the first all-black musical to enjoy a long run and be treated as more than an oddity. Jeez. On the New York opening night, the audience loved the show. Influential critics like Alan Dale, George Jean Nathan, and Haywood Brown were highly enthusiastic. Gradually, Shuffle Along built up a cult status. So big were the crowds that the police had trouble controlling the traffic. Eventually, they had to make 63rd a one-way street. Is it still? Does anybody know? A black show was back on Broadway, even if 63rd Street, a long way uptown, was barely Broadway. In U.B. Blake's words, it wasn't Broadway, but we made it Broadway. How about that? I'm Just Wild About Harry was the most popular number in the show. Blake conducted the show's orchestra and recorded the songs for the Victor label. Noble Sissel's 1937 recording for the Victory label altered the original tone considerably in order to showcase the talents of clarinetist Sidney Beckett. It might be Bechet, I'm not sure. Bechet. Any clarinetist aficionados know whether that's pronounced correctly or not. The other early recordings included those of Benny Kruger, Louis Mitchell, and Paul Whiteman. In 2014, it returned to Broadway in a revival of Shuffle Along. How do you like that? Well, at any rate, that's got to be enough about the song, but I had no idea about the controversy. People brought it up during the discussion of the mouse thing because they saw it on Wikipedia when they went to look it up. Let's see. Scott sends me a text about this here. Let's see. See a song list for songs seen as less controversial at the time. Oh boy, I don't think I want to see this. But the link isn't working anyway, so that's too bad. Email me the link if you would, Scott. I don't know why the link wouldn't work, but I have a feeling that we would disagree. Oh, here we go. Let's see. See the song list for, okay. This is the song list of Shuffle Along itself. Is this a picture of the cover for the sheet music or something? So, let's see. What's less controversial at the time? Can I read any of these things? Not really. It's actually kind of difficult to read here. Oh boy, well, there's at least, I see, right down at the bottom there. Okay, we have such amazing hits as Old Black Joe and Uncle Tom and Pickaninny Shoes. Is that right? All right, well, yes, it was 1921 after all. And right, mind you, this was considered returning to Broadway with dignity. And that's about as far as you could get away with dignity at the time, I suppose. Well, we'll try and do it with dignity, but remember, so that we don't get booed off the stage by white racists, we should probably include some songs that'll make it clear that, hey, we're not taking ourselves too seriously here. What a time. What a country. But something CRT. This show is now CRT, I guess, and we're banned from all the platforms. Maybe Spotify will kick us off next. I don't know. You're allowed to be controversial as a white racist, just not an anti-racist there, I guess. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I bet you didn't think we were going to spend all that much time on that. Although I guess once I introduced the topic and said, we're just going to briefly treat this, then you would have been able to guess at that point how long it would take me to get through the topic. But I thought that made an interesting Friday presentation. Certainly in keeping with the Friday weirdness of the show. And not someplace most other shows will take you. And I don't know. I was glad to be able to do it. All right, let's see. What other fun stuff have we got to share with you? All right, here's a segue for you. This is clearly a sign. Our gun-watching friend, SFDB, sending us another strange and absurd gun story. A passenger in a car traveling on Miami's Dolphin Expressway. I don't think I even know about that one. Is shot when he picks up a bag containing a gun off the floorboard of the car. It happens. It does happen. This is part of SFDB's continuing our NRA World series on Twitter. I say it's a good segue because I mentioned to you that I had a piece from Darwin here, and Darwin, originally from South Florida himself, and a Miami Dolphins fan, or I guess negligible fan, marginal Miami Dolphins fan at this point, mentions that and the reasons for it in his piece. But a good segue off of the weirdness of the situation surrounding the Broadway show Shuffle Along and the weirdness surrounding the continuing rarity of black head coaches in the NFL. And I guess as we come to the end of the NFL season, it makes sense to play this through, and I'll have the accompanying article for you in today's roundup. Why don't we do that? Well, the tea's still hot. If you don't mind, Darwin, ready to roll.
Hi there, David. Hi to all the KITM family listening out there in Radio Land. This is Darwin coming to you today as the senior black correspondent. I have an article here from The Atlantic written by Jamel Hill. She's talking about the NFL coaches and the cycle of firing that happens at the end of each season. It's titled, The Continuing Humiliation of the Black NFL Coaches. So she begins. Coaches such as David Culley, just fired from the Houston Texans, and Brian Flores of the Miami Dolphins until very recently, face a major problem in the NFL. It's not their pedigree. It's not their experience. It's not their ability to relate to players. It's not their offense or defensive schemes. It's that they're black. I would definitely interject and say that definitely it's not the ability to relate to players. The league is made up of like 75% black athletes. So, it is what it is. That conclusion might seem harsh, but it's been almost 20 years since the NFL adopted the Rooney Rule, which was intended to give candidates of color a better shot at head coaching jobs and was eventually expanded to cover front office openings as well. What the league has to show for its efforts in 2022 is the Pittsburgh Steelers' Mike Tomlin as the lone black head coach in the league. The reason is painfully obvious. In a league where roughly 70% of players are black, I said 75 earlier. Okay, 70% of players are black. Owners have no real interest in seeing black coaches thrive. The league currently has 8 head coaching job openings, and the names of a bevy of black coaches have popped up as potential interviewees or even leading candidates. Yet most will be passed over, and the few who get hired are likely to inherit difficult situations in which they won't be extended the same patience that their white counterparts enjoy. This is just how the NFL operates. The firings of Culley and Flores highlight the double standard and unrealistic expectations that black coaches routinely face. I'll interject here and say that I'm not much of an NFL fan these days. Really, it's just because I grew up as a Miami Dolphins fan. I grew up in South Florida, and I haven't had a reason to cheer for the NFL or the Dolphins in a long time. And so over the years, I've just become, disillusioned with the team, and NFL just became kind of boring to me. I digress. Last year, the 66-year-old Culley was the only black head coach to be hired, and now he's gone after just one season. The Texans' 4-13 record certainly looks bad, but keep in mind that the team released its 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, J.J. Watt, a few weeks into Culley's coaching tenure. The star quarterback, Deshaun Watson, sat on the bench all season because the Texans were hoping to trade him away. What happened is actually Watson is currently facing a bunch of civil lawsuits that allege he engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior with a number of female massage providers. Funny enough, as much as I'm disgusted with the Dolphins, this was one of the quarterbacks that they were thinking of bringing in to the team mid-season. It was another reason. It was just confirmation of like, okay, this is why I don't bleep with this team. And they're trying to bring on this guy who's been on the bench, and he has all these allegations. That's why he's been on the bench, is because the allegations of sexual impropriety. So, of course, the Dolphins, as a dysfunctional organization as this, are trying to, we're thinking of bringing this guy on board. Continuing. Despite that turmoil, the Texans won the same number of games under Culley this season as they did under the predecessor Bill O'Brien last season. And O'Brien had Watson on the field. If anything, Culley outperformed any reasonable expectations based on what he had to work with. Last week, when reporters pressed the Texans general manager Nick Caserio about why Culley was fired, Caserio had nothing to offer. It's not necessarily one specific thing, he vaguely explained. In the end, there was some differences about next steps or how we move forward, not necessarily rearview mirror about what has happened. That's just so vague. The reason Caserio couldn't provide much insight is because the Texans put Culley in a position where he had no chance to succeed. Culley came in with 27 years of NFL coaching experience, but had never before had a real opportunity to be a head coach. The Texans handed him a thin roster lacking any high-impact players. Before hiring Culley for the top coaching job, the team actually interviewed Josh McCown. He's a veteran NFL quarterback who has never coached professionally and hasn't played in the league since 2019. In fact, McCown, his only coaching experience had been at a high school in Charlotte, North Carolina. The Texans are now considering him again, fueling speculation that McCown was their first choice and that they hired Culley last year only because they feared how rejecting the more experienced coach would look. Just the fact that McCown, who is white, has been able to interview twice for a head coaching job with a practically non-existent resume speaks to what black coaches are up against in the NFL. Maybe Culley wasn't the right long-term fit for the Texans. But if the Texans used him as a shield to hire the coach they actually wanted, that would be beyond insulting. Unfortunately, the NFL black coaches are expected to perform miracles quickly, and when they don't, it usually costs them their jobs. In 2018, the Arizona Cardinals fired Steve Wilkes after one season. Like Culley, Wilkes took over a team with poor prospects, not least because the Cardinals general manager Steve Keim had made a series of questionable draft choices. But Wilkes was the one who paid the price. Culley has been judged far more harshly than the Detroit Lions head coach Dan Campbell, who is white. The Lions have been a woeful franchise for decades. Sounds like the Dolphins. This season, the team flirted with going winless for the second time in franchise history. Campbell won one fewer game than Culley. But despite the Lions' 3-13-1 record, the mood around Campbell is optimistic and hopeful. Sports Illustrated recently published a listicle bearing the headline, 4 Signs Dan Campbell is Right Coach for the Lions. It praised him for being brought to tears early in the season when Detroit lost to Minnesota and slipped to 0-5 record. It is so refreshing to see a head coach who gets emotional, the author wrote. Some optimism is warranted. Under Campbell, the Lions, who lost many close games, have been more competitive than their record suggests. Campbell certainly deserves more time to see if he can turn the Lions around, but many black coaches in similar positions don't get the same benefit of the doubt. When they can't show immediate improvements, and sometimes even when the results are impressive, they still are not good enough. The Lions are the same franchise that fired Jim Caldwell in 2017, after he led the Lions to 2 playoff appearances in his 4 seasons as head coach. Caldwell, who is black, and went to a Super Bowl as the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts in 2010, had 3 winning seasons, including his final season when Detroit was 9-7. The Lions thought they could do better than Caldwell, but they didn't. Matt Patricia, the Lions' next coach, failed to have a winning season, never went to the playoffs, and finished his Lions tenure with 13-29 record. Caldwell, on the other hand, was 36-28. Meeting a fate similar to Caldwell's was Flores, who was fired despite guiding the Dolphins to their back-to-back winning seasons since 2002-2003. Some reports ascribe the shocking move to Flores' conflict with the general manager, Chris Greer, and the starting quarterback, Tua. Testy relationships within a football team are nothing new, but plenty of other coaches have strong personalities keep their jobs, especially after showcasing the kind of promise that Flores exhibited. Even if Flores lands at another team, he's rumored to be the top candidate for the New York Giants opening, by the way, or other black coaches are named head coaches in the current hiring cycle. His firing and Culley's have left a unique stain on the NFL's hiring process for head coaches. Since its inception, the NFL has twice expanded the reach of the Rooney Rule. In an effort to force NFL owners to consider minority candidates more seriously, the rule was well-intentioned, and sometimes over the years it has appeared to have some impact, but no substantive change will occur as long as NFL owners continue to see black coaches as expendable. These owners' failure to value black male leadership becomes obvious at this time of season, just like it did last year. Unfortunately, it's a serious problem that the NFL doesn't seem to have the motivation or will to solve. It seems to me that the notion of meritocracy for these head coaching jobs in the NFL, it's fictional. There's plenty of data, and we have so much evidence in front of us. As we speak, there's only one black head coach in the NFL for a league with 70% plus black athletes. Numbers don't lie. Anyways, this is Darwin_Darko. Thanks for listening, and back to you, David.
All right. Thanks, Darwin. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I also have not been paying a great deal of attention to what's been going on in the NFL of late. I've just kind of lost interest in general. I mean, certainly the team that I was rooting for and always had rooted for. I know it used to be, quite excited to root for the New York Giants. Fallen off the map of late, but I've sat through bad seasons before. But between that and sort of the growing realization of just, what a horrible thing it is for the bodies of the players and the damage that's being done. And just, I don't know, it sort of turned me off to the whole thing. I mean, it might have been different, I suppose, and maybe it really was chiefly driven by the Giants being no good. But between that and also the expense of keeping up with the Giants from out of market, subscribing to DirecTV and their NFL game day package or whatever the hell it was called, it just got progressively more and more expensive until it became, it was into the hundreds of dollars to be able to watch the games. And then, of course, the games were terrible and you lost them all. That was very discouraging, too. But just the fact that being asked to pay hundreds of dollars to watch the games was kind of annoying. And it got to the point where we said, all right, not interested in paying that much anymore. And they did a good job with customer retention for a while. Every time we called to cancel, they would ask what the issue was. And we were just like, well, the NFL package is just way too expensive, and they would slash the price. And then for a couple of years, we just would do that routinely, and they'd slash the price. And okay, fine. Then they'd try to increase it, and we'd call and complain. They'd slash it back down again. But eventually we got tired of the game, and it wasn't worth our time even anymore to do it. But anyway, so I haven't been paying a great deal of attention, but you don't have to pay a great deal of attention to notice whether or not there are almost no black head coaches in the league, even though, I guess, admittedly, I have no idea who the head coaches are for any of these teams anymore. So I'm no authority on it, but I was really struck by the example of what went on with this one, well, the opening example of this one particular team that had, it sounded like, had, I guess, dealt with the so-called Rooney Rule by saying, well, we really would prefer to hire this other coach for whatever reason. I just thought it was interesting that for whatever reason they wanted to hire this white coach, but they basically, it looks like what you do is you use a black coach as a shield. You hire a black coach with no expectation of success, let them have a run at it for a year, maybe, possibly for multiple years, and then fire them so that you can clear the way for the coach you wanted to have in the first place, but were afraid to hire because it would run afoul of the Rooney Rule in rather obvious ways. And I don't know if anybody really anticipated that when they instituted this rule. I'm sure it was well-intentioned, but yeah, one of the weird side effects is that you could end up with this routine usage of, like actual human beings with real careers who wanted a fair shot at exhibiting their skills as head coaches in the NFL being used as disposable shields to legitimize the eventual hiring of a white coach that they really wanted in the first place. It's really kind of a disturbing development. I mean, it wouldn't have been on the top of my list of issues to point at, but that's one of the reasons why, that's why you get to redirect things on this show. If you are willing to record it and make a point of, make it easy, really, for me to shift gears and cover something that I might not otherwise have been drawn to. And I might have missed this one for any number of reasons. One, that it's the NFL and not politics, but it's got its political bent. And I certainly haven't been paying attention to who's in the ranks of coaches in the NFL. So another good reminder of the importance of bringing a lot of different minds to bear on topic selection. So thanks very much for doing that. And you're all invited to do the same thing. I know I've been boring you to death with the same message that we put in the podcast versions, our own little commercials, whether it's for fundraising or for making a pitch for you to send us your own segments. And in fact, Gil has been saying to me, I'm tired of hearing my own voice. You got to retire my bit at some point. And I agree. And it only makes me think, I don't agree in the sense that, what do I care? I don't hear the damn things, but and they're so convenient and helpful for me. But he said he might record us a new one at some point. That would be nice. And that made me think I owe you a new one on everything. I think my recording about sending in your own segments is the original one that I recorded, 2 years ago plus, and I've been using every day. It must be boring you all to death. But how many ways are there to say this stuff? Maybe I can refresh it. Plus, the fundraising message has been, it's been since, it's over a year now. October, I guess, of 2021, we might have done that, or 2020. I can't remember. Maybe that would make it over a year, but 2021, I don't know. At any rate, it's probably my least favorite thing to do, re-recording those things. But it's a good point. Anyway, you should all send your own segments so we get stuff like this. The topics that we would otherwise perhaps never find the time to divert ourselves to. And Friday's a great day for it. All right, many other things to round up here. More traditional stories that I thought I would share with you. Here's a Friday one of some interest. It actually made me think, why didn't we know this stuff earlier? And what happened with the opposition research on this? But I assume that the timing was just lousy. But a Glenn Youngkin story from Dana Milbank, not one of my favorites necessarily, but this is an interesting bit. Glenn Youngkin didn't mind if some kids got an anti-racist education, like, for instance, his own. How interesting. Of course, he's, on a tear to try to eliminate all the anti-racist education that's going on in Virginia's public schools. But remember, his kids, he's rich. They don't go to Virginia public schools. They go to D.C. elite private schools. Now, I had thought that I had read somewhere that at least one of his kids, maybe he sends them to all the different elite private schools to try to get a foot in every door. I had thought that his kids went to Georgetown Prep. But Milbank's article claims it's elsewhere. I don't know who's right, and maybe both are right. But he begins this way. Not only is Virginia's new Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, banning the fictional menace of critical race theory from public schools, but he's also turning the Commonwealth into a little Stasi state. He's setting up a tip line so parents can report to the government any school official they consider to be teaching something divisive. We're asking for folks to send us reports, he told a conservative radio host on Monday. We're going to make sure we catalog it all to make sure we're rooting it out. You remember hearing that. The state's deputizing of residents to act as informants will have the obvious effect of deterring even mentions of slavery or race, which means Youngkin has imposed a de facto memory law, whitewashing Virginia's and the country's deep and ongoing history of white supremacy. Youngkin is taking a page from Texas, which financially incentivizes ordinary residents to file civil claims against those who violate the state's new abortion ban. The Texas Right to Life Committee tried to set up a tip line for reporting infractions there, too. Virginia's new thought policing also includes overriding school districts' decisions on face masks and firing the University of Virginia's counsel, Tim Heaphy, who was on leave advising the House's January 6th committee. Youngkin's move on critical race theory also comes with an added dollop of hypocrisy. This is the one we're here for. Public schools, including Virginia's, don't teach critical race theory, which was a little-known academic school of thought before the Fox News crowd misrepresented it as a threat to American children. But do you know which schools do teach divisive concepts, including something resembling critical race theory? The private D.C. schools Youngkin had his children attend. And you know who was on the board of governors of those schools while it was beefing up its anti-racism policies? Glenn Youngkin. Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise. Youngkin, a professed fan of public school parents' rights, exercised his own parental rights not to send his children to Virginia public schools, but rather to National Cathedral School and St. Albans School, twin private all-girl and all-boy schools in D.C. under the auspices of the Episcopal Church. I'll just pause briefly for a moment here and remind you that he does live in Great Falls, I believe, which would be among the top school districts in the country and might even qualify him to send his kids. I don't know, maybe you have to live a little bit closer in than Great Falls, maybe closer to McLean to qualify to go to Langley High School, among, again, also one of the top high schools in the country. I mean, they have top-notch public schools in these very wealthy enclaves of Fairfax County in particular. And he's got access to the top schools in the country just by going to public schools. And, of course, if his kids are top achievers, they can be admitted to the science academies as well. TJ, Thomas Jefferson, who we've mentioned in the past. And but they choose to forego that and go to the top elite and elitist private schools in D.C. Anyway, National Cathedral's website listed Youngkin as a member of its governing board from 2016 through 2019, and he was chair of its finance committee, because he's rich. To their credit, both National Cathedral and St. Albans were, during that time, leaders in developing anti-racism teachings. Even before the murder of George Floyd heightened awareness of systemic racism. And that's, of course, because any number of previous murders should have, and in fact, in this case, did heighten their awareness of the need for anti-racism teachings. He's right. To their credit, they did, in fact, do something about this. Youngkin's spokeswoman, Macaulay Porter, said that Youngkin stepped off the board after 2019 and that both schools, quote, changed a lot over the years. Now, here they're being offered the opportunity to be recognized for being a part of a board that takes a fairly progressive view of race relations in the country, an elite D.C. private school that probably could perfectly well get away with ignoring all such controversy, but makes the conscious decision to say, no, we really owe our students the opportunity to get educated on this issue. I mean, that should be something it is to their credit, and it should be something to Youngkin's credit, but his politics has forced him to distance himself from it and say, I won't take any credit for it. I left the board in 2019, and things have changed a lot since then. Changed a lot over the years. 2019, it's 2021 right now. 2022 right now. So let's see, 19, 20, 21, 22. Wow. You think things have changed a great deal at the National Cathedral School in St. Albans in 3 years? I mean, take the credit for it. But of course, if he takes the credit for it, then he looks like a hypocrite. That's the problem with your politics, sir. Anyway, so what's been going on? DEI, not DUI, that might be going on, but DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, has been a priority at National Cathedral for many years. The school has an extensive staff devoted to the initiative, as well as programming that includes affinity groups such as diversity forums, an equity board, an intersectionality council, and a student diversity leadership conference. A National Cathedral strategic plan approved by the board in 2018 during Youngkin's tenure includes the mandate to advance an inclusive educational environment, a good thing, which involved integrating related action steps into the fabric of everything we are and do as a school community. I mean, I guess A-OK with Youngkin then when his kids were benefiting from it, but now that your kids might benefit from it for free, quote-unquote free after paying your taxes, no, we can't have any of that. Among the other things that National Cathedral has done, made time in the school schedule for critical conversations around topics of race, anti-racism, social justice, and inclusion. Oh my God, they used the word critical? They're crazy. They've added courses such as Black Lives in Literature and Courageous Dialogues, like I'm Just Wild About Harry. Developed new hiring protocols as a result of our anti-bias work, and required diversity training for all staff members, and included in the school's summer reading list books such as Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. Wow, I mean, that's out there for a school like that. While Youngkin, the governor, declares that parents should report teachers who discuss divisive, I'll say it that way this time, things, Youngkin, the parent, favored a place that believes that, quote, as we hold conversations around honoring each student's identity, history, and experiences, discomfort helps us to stretch and grow. Learning how to engage in difficult conversations, to listen respectfully, and to consider multiple perspectives are vital. And they are. St. Albans has undertaken similar anti-racism initiatives. Among the books promoted on the school's website are White Fragility, but also Critical Race Theory, an Introduction. I mean, I think that one you could get away with saying that actually is critical race theory. It's a book about critical race theory. What else have we got? Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s Stony the Road, Reconstruction, White Supremacy and the Rise of Jim Crow, and Ibram X. Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. Sounds like a good list, and maybe I should read the St. Albans list. Why not in all my copious spare time? St. Albans also directed faculty to read Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Fox News and other conservative outlets this past fall blasted a St. Albans anti-bias policy draft. So, it's been vetted by Fox here. Youngkin's own children were lucky, that's true, were lucky to have attended schools that made its students grapple with uncomfortable and, yes, divisive issues. So why is he now using the powers of the state to intimidate teachers who would give Virginia's public school students the same advantage? Well put at the end. Big points for Dana Milbank, the Dick Whisperer. In this one, look, there's good and bad. There is good and bad in everyone. I'll throw a little Ebony and Ivory in there to really smooth over the race. All right. Well, anyway, great point. It makes you wonder why that didn't come up in the campaign, right? Except, of course, they kind of pulled this stuff as an October surprise, and even the opposition researchers who may have had this fresh in mind probably had no time to respond with advertising that would address it. But that would have been a powerful gut punch in return, don't you think? Too bad. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think I still have the volume turned up a little extra from when I wanted to boost the signal on Darwin's piece here. And it has affected everything, including the intro and outro music. All right, lots to get to here. I've screwed myself over once again in getting to all the important stuff. There's no way to blurt it all out on a Friday. Let me get right to it. Let's see. I put aside this story that I saw come across the Twitter transom from the Texas Tribune. Sounds like an important story. Texas violated the voting rights laws during redistricting. That is federal voting rights laws during redistricting, according to a retiring state Republican senator who says so in a sworn court statement. I saw it tweeted around with the note quite correctly expressed. I wish I had the tweet handy now. It's amazing what retiring and no longer facing the Republican base to maintain power will do to your, well, I mean, I'm paraphrasing this now and embellishing the comment, but will do to your sense of propriety and what, under which circumstances you're more likely to say, oh, I don't know, tell the truth about things. Alex Ura writes this for the Texas Tribune, the subheader on that badly mangled headline. I mangled it. A 3-judge federal panel is hearing arguments in a lawsuit claiming that Texas Republicans violated the Voting Rights Act when they redrew State Senate District 10 in Tarrant County to lessen black and Hispanic voting power. Who are we talking about? Well, I guess I should just get to the body of the article. That'll explain it all. In a sworn declaration submitted as part of an ongoing federal court challenge, a senior Republican state senator with redistricting experience said he believes his party violated federal voting laws when it drew new boundaries for State Senate District 10 in the Fort Worth area. Having participated in the 2011 and 2013 Senate Select Redistricting Committee proceedings, and having read the prior federal court decision regarding Senate District 10, it was obvious to me that the renewed effort to dismantle Senate District 10 violated the Voting Rights Act and the U.S. Constitution. State Senator Kel Seliger, Seliger. And I don't know what his full first name is, but goes by Kel, Kel. So maybe we'll find out at some point. But Kel Seliger said this in a declaration signed in November. The statement from the Amarillo Republican emerged this week as part of a days-long hearing before a 3-judge panel considering a lawsuit that claims the district was intentionally reconfigured to discriminate against voters of color in Tarrant County. Under the map passed by the Republican-controlled legislature, some black and Hispanic populations previously in District 10 were split into 2 other districts with majority white electorates. The black and Hispanic voters who remain in the newly drawn District 10 in urban areas of South Fort Worth were lumped in with several rural, mostly white counties to the south and west that drive up the district's population of white eligible voters while diminishing the number of voters of color. A group of plaintiffs, including State Senator Beverly Powell, a Democrat of Burleson, perhaps, who represents the current Senate District 10, is asking the federal judges to throw out the new district ahead of the March primaries. Seliger chaired the Senate Redistricting Committee last decade. Oh, I need to make a note for myself here. Let's see. I'll probably never get to it too. By the way, did everybody notice the status of my totally effective note to self yesterday on the speech being canceled? That would be the training speech for teachers. I absolutely forgot to go and look for that tweet and include it in the roundup yesterday. So instead, I'll pause for a second here. Somewhere in Pocket, I believe, I have put away, I'm reminded by the fact that they have the March primary here. A very interesting and clever, they're very good at the voter suppression that they do, especially down in Texas. But did I put this aside? I'm pretty sure that I did, or at the very least, it's in my Twitter stream at some point from a couple of days ago. It's a voter registration activist who I don't know whether they're working in Texas or somewhere else where they have a March primary, but I recall them mentioning that was the case. But I think it is Texas, and so one of the rules that they've got down there is now, if you are going to conduct a voter registration drive, you have to register with the state, and you have to register as a what was the term for it? Like a deputy registrar for the county in order to be allowed to just, hold one of those voter registration drives. That in other states, you're allowed to go and get the cards that people fill out when they register to vote. And you stand out there on a street corner or in front of the supermarket or wherever, or go to church and say, anybody want to register to vote? Doesn't matter what party. In fact, don't tell me. You can't tell me. And it doesn't make any difference. You want to register to vote? I've got the cards. Here, fill them out. Those are the cards. If you went to the post office and picked one up and filled it out and dropped it in the box yourself or mailed it or whatever, it would be perfectly fine. But if I hand it to you, in Texas, I have to be registered with the county, the government. The government has to have my, the deep state has got to get my information because I've handed you the card. Just another way of discouraging people from conducting voter registration drives. But on top of that, this is the really sneaky part, right? In order to become, all right, so fine, you register as a deputy registrar. How hard could that be, right? Well, as it turns out, in order to be legitimately recognized as a deputy registrar, you got to complete certain courses in order to be properly trained. Well, okay, you want people to be properly trained. That's a good thing, I guess. Fine. Oh, by the way, the courses that you need are only offered by the state. We're the only ones qualified to, I guess the county, to offer those courses. And, well, as it happens, we don't have any of those courses scheduled until after the date by which you'd have to register in order to be eligible to vote in the primary. Isn't that amazing? So you would like to register people to vote. Fine. You want to become a deputy registrar. Fine. You can do that. You're willing to take the courses. Fine. That's okay. The deadline for registering to vote and be eligible in the March primaries falls sometime in February. And guess what? Oh, gosh, the course isn't available until after that date. So you can't legally actually register people just because procedure, right? They engineered a procedural workaround. Oh, yeah. There's no voter suppression here. All you got to do is comply with these very simple requests. We simply make it impossible for you to do so. That's all. Super clever stuff. I mean, evil, but super clever. Anyway, I'm glad I squeezed that back in there. Let's go back to the Texas Tribune story. I will, for whatever it's worth, make another note to myself about this. I'll make the note and I'll circle it. What I need now, of course, is a note telling me to look at the notes that I have made. All right. Where do we leave off here? Beverly Powell, right? And the March primaries. That's it. Seliger, the guy who actually blew the whistle on them, chaired the Senate's redistricting committee last decade, redrawing the state's maps following the 2010 census when a similar attempt to reshape the districts was found to be discriminatory. By the way, did he tell on himself then? I don't know. A federal court in Washington, D.C. ruled in 2012 that lawmakers had discriminated against voters of color in dismantling the district and cracking apart their communities. As a result, the legislature went back to restore the district's configuration. Seliger affirmed his declaration in a video deposition taken earlier this month, portions of which were played in open court in El Paso this week, during which he also said that pretextual reasons were given for how political boundaries were decided during the 2021 redistricting process. Seliger pointed to the redrawing of his own district in the Texas Panhandle as an example. The district was reconfigured so that it lost several counties from the region, while picking up about a dozen on the southern end of the district, closer to Midland, from where Seliger had picked up a primary challenger. He ultimately decided against seeking re-election. The chamber's chief map drawer, Senator Joan Huffman of Houston, Republican, said throughout the process that the maps were drawn race-blind, while following various guidelines such as preserving political subdivisions, communities of interest, and geographical compactness. Beyond the challenge to Senate District 10, the state is defending the legislature's redistricting work against the collection of legal challenges to its new maps for the state, House, and Senate, and for Congress. The legislature passed maps last year that solidified the GOP's dominance while weakening the influence of voters of color. None of the maps offer Hispanic Texans new opportunities to turn their growing numbers into political power, even though they were behind half the state's growth in the last decade. The federal lawsuits are built on allegations that lawmakers discriminated, in some cases intentionally, against voters of color by diminishing the power of their votes. The challenge of SD10 is running ahead of the various challenges to the House and congressional maps, which are not set to go to trial until the fall, even though the primaries are already underway. On Wednesday, Seliger told the Texas Tribune that his statement about the illegality of SD10 was more of a concern than it was an assertion of whether there was a violation. When you draw a map that is essentially takes out minorities, or in what was more the point, take out the chance that there would ever be a Democrat elected there, was there a violation? Seliger said. It's not an assertion on my part because I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but that was my concern about Senator Powell's district, to take that district and completely change it, and it's still marginalized minorities in that district. He added that there was a context surrounding the drawing of SD10, even as Huffman asserted she had not paid any attention to racial data in drawing its boundaries that requires lawmakers to consider race. The Voting Rights Act says if you can create a district in which a historically marginalized minority can elect a candidate of their choice, you must draw that district, Seliger says. You start with that principle in every single district. As part of his deposition, Seliger indicated that he had not authored the declaration in question, which he signed under penalty of perjury. Instead, it had been provided to him by Powell. Still, he said he stood by the statements that were included. Is everything exactly the way I would have written it? I can't tell you that. I doubt it, but it was perfectly acceptable, Seliger says. Interesting twist a little bit at the end there, but we'll see what that's worth in courts in Texas anyway, and see whether that makes a dent in courts elsewhere in the federal system. All right, found that to be rather important. Glad I got a chance to share with you. Here's another interesting and weird twist. Well, first I'll do another state bill of some concern from, let's see, The Hill. Who else is writing about it? Is it just The Hill? I guess so. I saw about it in the Arizona Republic, but it was behind a paywall. But The Hill has broken through their paywall. Arizona bill would allow the legislature to overturn election results. Finally, someone's gotten straight to it. They haven't passed this bill, and I don't know whether it has any chances of passing in Arizona, but it's now out there. Reed Wilson reports for The Hill. An arch-conservative member of Arizona's State House of Representatives has proposed a mammoth overhaul of the state's voting procedures that would allow legislators to overturn the results, just directly overturn the results, of a primary or general election after months of unfounded allegations and partisan audits. They might have more trouble with the primaries even than the general elections. It might become interesting whether the parties oppose them or not. The bill, introduced by State Representative John Fillmore, would, of course a Republican, would substantially change the way Arizonans vote by eliminating most early and absentee voting and requiring people to vote in their home precincts rather than at vote centers set up around the state. Most dramatically, Fillmore's bill would require the legislature to hold a special session after an election. You're required to hold a special session after every election to review the election processes and results and to accept or reject the election results. Isn't that something? The proposal comes after President Biden became the first Democrat since former President Clinton to win Arizona's electoral votes. He defeated former President Trump there by just under 11,000 votes, or about 0.3 of a percentage point. Ever since, Arizona Republicans have been riven between election denialists who have pushed to investigate or overturn the results and more mainstream legislators and Governor Doug Ducey who have tried to move on. An audit, fake audit, conducted by an inexperienced firm called Cyber Ninjas failed to uncover evidence of fraud or miscounting. But Fillmore said at a committee hearing on Wednesday he still does not believe the reports he has seen, though he maintained his skepticism had little to do with the ultimate winner. I don't care what the press says. I don't trust ABC, CBS, NBC, or Fox, or anybody out there. Everybody's lying to me, and I feel like I have a couple hundred ex-wives hanging around me. Ugh. Fillmore said, "This is not a President Biden thing. This is not the other red-headed guy thing." I don't know whether he meant red-headed or red-hatted. But anyway, we should have voting, in my opinion, in person, one day, on paper, with no electronic means, and hand counting that day. We need to get back to 1958-style voting, he added. Interesting enough all by itself, but how about the part where the legislature can just say, I don't like the results, let's undo it. Arizona Republicans, who shepherded through major overhauls of voting rights last year, are continuing their efforts to change election procedures in this year's session. Legislators have introduced dozens of measures to change procedures around absentee ballots, which the vast majority of Arizona voters use to cast their votes, as well as rules about where people can vote and how election administrators go about cleaning up the voter rolls. Fillmore's legislation is unlikely to gain much traction, thankfully, but it is a sign that some Republicans have embraced the idea that legislators should have veto power over the will of the voters if they do not like the results. Arizona is one of 7 states where Trump supporters created a series of fake documents purported to be from a slate of electors who voted for Trump in the 2020 elections. A senior Justice Department official said this week that those documents are being investigated. Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs last month referred the matter to Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich, though Brnovich, too, has questioned the integrity of the 2020 elections. So, it might not go anywhere. So that's of some concern. Here's another interesting twist of fate, I guess, that seems rather important. I'll read from Ms. Magazine, which you'll see in a moment why it's particularly appropriate, but I guess they were among the first to notice this. This has escaped my notice up until now. Carrie N. Baker, reporting for Ms. Magazine, the Equal Rights Amendment has been ratified. You remember that one, don't you? It is the law. Wow. U.S. House resolution declares ERA the 28th Amendment. What's going on here? In an opinion issued on Wednesday, January 26th, the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel, you know them, the OLC Memo people, helped clear the way for the Equal Rights Amendment, according to leading ERA advocates. In January of 2020, under Trump, the OLC issued an opinion arguing that Congress had no power to remove a 7-year timeline for ratification in the preamble of the ERA, and that therefore 3 recent state ratifications were invalid. You remember do you remember the history of the ERA? This was something, we were trying to get past, late 70s into early 80s, and several states did ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, but there was a preamble in the language of the amendment that apparently, I don't know how they came to it, I don't know what the political background is, but I'm sure it was a concession that somebody wrung out of them at the time, saying, okay, we can attempt to ratify this thing, but if the requisite number of states don't ratify it within a specific time period, and I guess here 7 years, then it won't become, a valid amendment to the Constitution. And at some point, somebody had the clever idea, why not constitutional hardball this thing, and ratified the same language about where it speaks to matters of equality under the law, but just remove the time period part from that language, and then say, well, the requisite number of states have ratified this language anyway. Everybody has ratified this part. Not everybody has ratified the part about there being a 7-year time limit, but we don't all agree with the 7-year time limit. That's actually quite clever. So what happens? Trump's OLC says, no, you can't do that, which is what you might expect out of an OLC. But then it's a new OLC. Now, what do they have to say about it? The OLC opinion issued by the Biden administration strongly affirms the power of Congress to remove the deadline. The opinion follows the overwhelming consensus among constitutional law scholars as well. According to a recent amicus brief authored by former Stanford Law School Dean Kathleen Sullivan and signed by Lawrence Tribe, Dorothy Roberts, Kimberly Crenshaw, Catherine McKinnon, and 11 other top constitutional scholars, and the text follows, the language of Article 5 is mandatory. An amendment to the Constitution shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states. Nor does the text of Article 5 envision a role for an executive branch officer to assert his discretion regarding the validity of the amendment. The text requires no additional action by Congress or by anyone else after ratification by the final state. In a press conference, Representatives Carolyn Maloney and Jackie Speer, both Democrats, of course, New York and California, respectively, responded to the newly issued OLC memo by saying that the ERA has already been ratified and should be recognized as the 28th Amendment, and that the archivist should do his ministerial duty to certify and publish the ERA. Action by Congress could clarify this, but it's not necessary for publication of the ERA. The ERA has been ratified. It is the law. It should be certified and published by the archivist, said Eleanor Smeal, president of the Feminist Majority Foundation. The fight now is that we're going to enforce the ERA. Without enforcement, it's just a symbol. We want the ERA enforced. On Thursday, January 27th, Representatives Speer, Maloney, and 120 co-sponsors introduced a resolution before the U.S. House affirming that the Equal Rights Amendment has been validly ratified and is now in effect as the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. 2 years ago, the final state, Virginia, ratified the amendment. The amendment says 2 years hence it is law, and that's today, said Speer. The ERA is fully ratified, no question about it. We introduced this resolution to underscore and affirm that the ERA has been validly ratified as required by the Constitution and should be recognized as the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, said Maloney. Also on January 27th, President Joe Biden issued a statement reiterating his strong support for the ERA and urged Congress to pass the resolution. No one should be discriminated against based on their sex, and we as a nation must stand up for full women's equality. Of course, in the interim, in between all the time it's taken to ratify this thing, we now find that it becomes a controversial statement to say that we're standing up for women's equality. Well, there's always work to do. The resolution states that the ERA has satisfied all Article 5 requirements to amend the Constitution. A 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate, achieved in 1971 and 72, and ratification by 3/4 of the states. Listing each of the 38 states by date of ratification, the House resolution resoundingly concludes the ERA has met the requirements of the Constitution and become valid to all intents and purposes as part of the Constitution and shall be known as the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. This sign of support and recognition is extremely important, especially as we are now in the 50th year since the amendment left Congress and went out to the states for ratification, said ERA Coalition Executive Director Carol Jenkins. People have worked hard every single day for half a century for this amendment. The House resolution addresses the Republican argument that the 3 recent ratifications by Nevada, Illinois, and Virginia came too late. I mean, if you want to make that a Republican position, I guess go for it. The resolution declares no time limit exists within the text of the proposed amendment that was ratified by 3/4 of the states. As a result of the Trump administration's OLC opinion, the National Archivist David S. Ferriero declined to take the final ministerial steps to make a constitutional amendment official, to verify the ratifications, and then publish a formal proclamation certifying that the amendment is valid and is part of the Constitution. Fascinating look at what is exactly the mechanics, the nuts and bolts of finalizing a new constitutional amendment. We know the process by which something supposedly becomes a constitutional amendment. The question is, what happens when the requisite number of states have ratified it? Like, what do? Like, fire off a flare gun and go, Constitution? Or what do we, what makes it part of it? And I guess the answer is this ministerial action by the National Archivist. It's almost like, they're not going to take out an original copy and like take a quill pen and write in the 28th Amendment, but somewhere there's an official document like the atomic clock of the Constitution, and so it's in the hands of the National Archivist. And just another reminder of how important the National Archivist can really be, since they've been in the news for, whether or not they should turn over documents from the Trump administration that were claimed as privileged, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you forget they're also, I guess, the last word. And I guess it makes you wonder about what happens if you get a total kook as your National Archivist who would do, the Trump administration has made us think about things like this. What do you do in a Trumpy administration where the National Archivist says, even when there isn't controversy about a time limit or anything, well, I'm just not going to do it. I don't think that was, I claim voter fraud of some kind, or I'm just not gonna. I don't have any reason, I'm just not gonna. What do you do? And, you can use the courts to force it. You get a writ of mandamus, I believe is probably what they would have to use in order to force their hand. But, suppose you get the writ of mandamus and the archivist says, well, how many divisions you got? I'm not doing it. Can they override them? Can they have something else? Can the writ of mandamus stand in place of the hand of the archivist in doing this? I don't know. And that eliminates the question of what if the crazy-ass Supreme Court says, nah, we don't recognize it. And we don't even want to give you the reason why we don't recognize it. We just don't. We're not going to issue the writ of mandamus, or we'll overturn the writ if somebody else issues it. Interesting set of questions. Luckily, we're not facing that here just yet. But a reminder that, real mechanics have to happen in order for things to work, quote unquote, the way they're supposed to. Always a good reminder. All right, where were we with this? Okay. Well, first of all, we've got to get our music started. Boom, there it goes. It's outrageous that one unelected official is stopping women from getting into the Constitution, said Maloney. We urge the Biden administration to withdraw the erroneous OLC opinion and instruct the archivist to certify the final 3 state ratifications and publish the ERA in the Federal Register. Okay, good. We ought to do that. I'll just do a little bit more of this one. Fascinating and a great topic for a Friday, and a good reminder once again of how much our rules-based system depends on decency.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Using the break to try and scroll back, but it's probably too far to scroll back, even in the 2-minute break, to find that thing that I made a note to myself about, to find the activist who was outlining the difficulties they were having in getting properly registered to register other people as voters, and to find out whether it was indeed in Texas, and just to put it in front of you and show you that I didn't make the whole thing up entirely. But if you believe me, then everything is fine. But I like to back things up. That's old blogger habits here. But, I might have seen it like last weekend, and scrolling all the way back through my feed, all the way back to last weekend, takes a fair bit of time. I'm doing it now anyway, and you can probably sense that I'm wasting time right now, talking about nothing in particular in order to do it. But it does remind me of a lot of other stories that we probably should have covered along the way, or at least made mention of. Did we make mention of the fact that Sarah Palin has COVID? I think so, right? I don't know. I've talked about it at home, and she's making a spectacle of herself. She is in New York City. Hey, I found it, by the way. So I found what I was looking for, and I'll share that with you later in just a second. But yeah, she's in New York to sue the New York Times in a defamation lawsuit. I can't even remember what it's about and whether it's well-founded or not, but it is Sarah Palin, so in all likelihood, no. And I think it's actually about the New York Times having written something that connected her campaign rhetoric to a mass shooting at some point, because you remember her with the, putting targets over people's faces, crosshairs over people's faces, and I think it might be the Gabby Giffords shooting that we're talking about. And, her saying, oh, the surveyor's marks. Yeah. So she's suing the New York Times for defamation over that. We'll see where it goes. But in the meantime, she's supposed to show up for the trial. And as they're getting ready to conduct the trial, there is a pandemic going on. And the judge said, all right, everybody's got to show vaccine cards or, I guess, a negative test for COVID in order to enter the courtroom and start the trial. And everybody complied. Of course, Sarah Palin, unvaccinated, went to provide the test and tested positive. And the trial has therefore been postponed until early February to give her time to isolate appropriately. However, She's been spotted out at all the fancy pants New York City restaurants. Fancy pageant walking her way into these restaurants and eating unmasked. And so alert for all the people at these various restaurants in New York. If you've been eating at the same place, you've been sharing germs with infected-ass Sarah Palin. So anyway, quite annoying. And we'll see whether the judge takes any notice of the fact that he postponed the trial with the intention that she isolate herself, but she has been eating at the restaurant since being ordered to isolate as well. So I don't know how well that goes over for her with the judge. Anyway, as I said, I was scrolling back to find the tweet I was looking for. I found it. It was from January 20th. It's from Taylor in Texas, who tweets as Taylor Coleman, spells Taylor Tayhlor, Taylor. Taylor Coleman tweeting a video of herself. Without online voter registration, Texans must get certified as a deputy voter registrar in order to legally register voters. The next course required for certification isn't until February in the county where I'm camping out this week, well past the voter registration deadline for the March primary. So I remembered it correctly, and now I can prove it to you. So good. I'm glad that we at least have that proof behind us. So back to the Equal Rights Amendment thing. A surprising and interesting twist. Thank the stars, I guess we'll say. Thank the flying spaghetti monster that all of these interested women were keeping an eye on all this stuff in the background. It's easy to forget along the way, but I suppose if you've dedicated your life to the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, it's not so easy to forget. So thankfully they've done that. And where were we? Yes. Right. So urging the Biden administration to withdraw the erroneous OLC opinion and instead instruct the archivist to do the job here and to publish this thing. Over 200 constitutional law scholars agree, recently signing a statement that Barr's OLC opinion is wrong and that the Biden Justice Department's OLC should withdraw that opinion. The scholars argue that the opinion is lacking a thoroughly reasoned understanding of precedent and congressional power under the Constitution, that it sought to advance a policy preference against the ERA, and that it is common practice for the OLC to review and withdraw legal opinions issued by a prior administration that are legally unsound and or do not reflect the view of the current president. Earlier this month, Columbia University's ERA project released a detailed analysis signed by top constitutional law scholars explaining why the OLC memo was flawed. I'd like to read those. And 16 scholars, including Tribe, Roberts, Crenshaw, and Sullivan, recently released a legal brief arguing that the ERA is validly ratified. What a fascinating problem, though, to be standing there and have two portions, once again, two tribes in the country saying, this is part of the Constitution. No, it isn't. Show me in the Constitution where it says it. Right here in the 28th Amendment. That's not an amendment. I mean, what a problem to have. I don't know if anybody ever anticipated this one. Wow. Anyway, let's see. Where were we here? States, we mentioned that there's a legal brief from 16 scholars arguing the ERA is validly ratified. States did not vote for the timeline. States voted for the text of the ERA. The timeline was in a preamble. The timeline is definitely not binding on Congress, said Georgetown law professor Victoria Norse, who was among the law scholars who signed the statement. That's a good point, right? I mean, if states didn't ratify the preamble, then how much, force or how much deference do you even give it? I understand, like, the desire to say, well, we did write down, and it might even have been the intention of Congress in ratifying the amendment that there be the 7-year deadline. But what if the states don't care? And since they're not voting on the preamble, or maybe they are voting on the preamble, but maybe not all states have, but maybe the argument, I don't know, I'd have to read it. Maybe the argument is that the only thing that all states agreed to vote on was the text of the amendment itself. I wonder whether there were any during the 7-year period that ratified it without the preamble. I guess I'd like to look all that up at some point. Could probably spend a whole show just on that. But let's continue with this instead. There is within the language of the amendment itself no deadline for ratification. said constitutional law scholar and Dean Erwin Chemerinsky of Berkeley Law School. And remember, he's the one that had to respond yesterday to the dumb question of, can a vice president be nominated to the Supreme Court? And he did so with great patience. Anyway, I think the Trump administration and the Justice Department was just wrong. The OLC memo said that there was a 7-year deadline for ratification based on the preamble to the ERA, not the language of the amendment. There are constitutional amendments that say within the text that they must be ratified within 7 years. The ERA is not such an amendment. I wonder if this was anticipated at the time during the debates. Maloney says the last amendment to the Constitution was ratified long after Congress first approved it in 1789. That's true. The 27th Amendment, I don't know if it had any time limit, though, anywhere in any part of it, was ratified over a course of 200 plus years. This same type of resolution Congress passed to affirm the validity of our nation's most recent amendment, the 27th Amendment, the Madison Amendment, which was ratified in 1992, over 200 years after it was first filed. We just need the archivist to certify it, said Speer. We are demanding that he do it. Another tactic by opponents of the ERA was to rescind state ratifications. In 2020, attorneys general from Alabama, Mississippi, and South Dakota, wow, they really want to be on the wrong side of history, which claimed to have rescinded their ratifications, sued to block the archivist from certifying that the conditions for ratification had been met. The House resolution notes that the 14th Amendment in 1868 was published to the Constitution despite 2 states purporting to rescind their ratifications. Wow. In the 1860s, several states tried to block the 14th Amendment by rescinding their ratifications, but Congress passed a resolution declaring the amendment validly ratified. The Supreme Court later affirmed that the 14th Amendment was validly ratified and part of the Constitution. That raises an interesting question of how much power Congress ought to have by resolution to declare something a valid amendment to the Constitution. Now, they're in fairly good shape here because everybody acknowledges the record of states, the requisite number of states having ratified. Then there's the question of whether or not they ought to be allowed to rescind ratification. And all right, for whatever reason, they decide against it. And good, I guess, in terms of being a fan of the 14th Amendment. But it does raise some serious questions, like, can the Congress do that? Like, what sort of powers ought they to have with respect to declaring rescission of ratification to be valid? And if they can do that, they did wait for ratification, but do they have to? Everybody, you would think the Constitution is pretty explicit about how amendments get adopted. So everyone would be loath to declare any question or opposition to the idea that it's ratified by having 3/4 of the states ratify it after passage by 2/3 of both houses of Congress. But if they can make effective a majority vote, simple majority vote resolution of, I guess, both houses, that purported rescission of ratification is invalid, can they also pass a resolution declaring there to have been ratification if there wasn't? What if you just blatantly lie? So, okay, again, Trump administration makes anything possible. They propose a constitutional amendment to, the things that they like to do. Balanced budget amendment, ban flag burning. Those are traditional Republican ones. If they want to make it Trump is president for life, for instance, and they pass that as a resolution. Can the Congress declare it to have been ratified by the requisite number of states, even if it hasn't been? And who decides whether or not that's a valid ratification? If, unfortunately, it falls to the 6-3 Republican and Trumpy Supreme Court, does the Supreme Court punt and say, well, it's a political question, the House can do anything it wants, House and Senate can do anything they want with respect to their own internal rules. And if they, let's say, declare that it's within their rules to exercise such power, we can't deny them the ability to do that. I mean, could you do something as wacky as that? I mentioned yesterday I thought I had invented a new kind of constitutional hardball offhand with Greg during our discussion of the SCOTUS nominations, and his pointing out that, yes, the Senate can consider the nomination of a Supreme Court justice before the vacancy technically becomes available, so that they could, in fact, consider a nominee and confirm a nominee now before Breyer makes his resignation effective, and that's well settled. So I asked the question of, why not do more? What's the limitation? If you don't have to wait for the vacancy to become available, and I mean, that's the language of the Constitution, right? I mean, I think my copy of Constitution is not as handy as it used to be, but I think the language is that the president can make appointments to fill vacancies when they happen. But, you know, if it's already well settled that a vacancy that hasn't happened can still have confirmation hearings and a confirmation of a nominee, and it kind of has to be the case. Otherwise, it would be ineffective for members of the Supreme Court to say, issue contingent letters of resignation, right? I'm going to retire contingent upon my successor being confirmed. If you want them to be able to do that, then you have to be able to allow nominations to be considered and confirmed before the vacancy occurs. And so the question is, what limitations are there on how far in advance you can do it? In other words, you know, if you really wanted to make a constitutional hardball question out of it, very few people question whether or not you could consider Breyer's replacement, you know, the nomination of Breyer's replacement now that he has said, I'm going to retire. But if he's not retiring until, you know, the end of the term, and it's contingent on a replacement having been confirmed, then you really don't know what the date is. And if that's still okay, then how many more nominations would he be entitled to make? Now, no one else has indicated any interest in retiring or resigning or anything like that. And of course, but, you know, on the other hand, all of them are going to die. We know that's a certainty, right? We just don't know when we're all going to be notified of the termination date that's going to be eventually entered in the history books for the various justices. So I was really hinting at the idea of expansion of the court. If you wanted to expand the court by 5 more seats and raise it to, you know, 14 or I guess 6 more seats and raise it to 15 members of the Supreme Court, which is, you know, a number that's been bandied about. There's lots of opposition to court expansion, whatever. But suppose you wanted to signal something. Biden supposedly doesn't, but suppose he did. Or suppose he was talked into it. Whatever, and you say, I want to fill all those seats. By the way, that's another interesting thing they're going to have to work out. If they do expansion, I'm figuring they're going to have to work out a deal at some point that says, but the current president, upon, you know, effective date of this new Judiciary Act law expanding the court, the president then in office shall nominate no more than X number of justices to the new seats and reserve the right to expand over this number of years, you know, so that the next president gets a chance. You know, you won't have one president nominating 6 new justices. They might have to make that deal in order to get the thing passed, in order to get the votes to make it pass. I mean, they should hardball it and just say, we'll do all 6, but that's something that will likely be floated. But at any rate, why not just grab all 6 now and say, I'm going to nominate 6 new members of the Supreme Court today, and I want hearings on them, and you should confirm them. Now, until the Expansion Act is, you know, adopted, becomes law, and is effective, there won't necessarily be any vacancies to fill. So I guess you could argue that, okay, they've been confirmed, but there's no vacancy yet. But what do you do with those people? Like, are they validly confirmed to the Supreme Court? Do they, if you never get around to expanding the court through statute and it remains 9, are they in line in the order in which they were confirmed? If indeed that's the case, if you had total command of a majority of the Senate now that there's no filibuster, right, on these things, if you had total command of a majority vote and you just said, yeah, President Biden, send us 6 nominations and we will consider them and we will confirm them. All you need is a majority vote and we have that command. Do they stand in line so that the next justice to retire, resign, or die is replaced by the first of the remaining 6 confirmands? Is that the right word? Would that be effective? I mean, why not? Somebody suggested, well, what about at the end of a Congress when they adjourn sine die? Aren't the people who haven't had action on their nominations returned? The nominations are returned to the White House and there's no activity on them. If you want to consider them in the following Congress, you have to renominate them. Yes, that's true for nominees on which there's been no confirmation vote. But for a nominee who's been confirmed, there's no such provision. The confirmations aren't rescinded and nominations returned to the White House. They're confirmed. That's it. That's the end. But I don't know how the courts would deal with it, and I don't know how this court would deal with it, or any other court for that matter. But that makes for an interesting question. I mean, that's a real constitutional hardball move, right? And, what worries me is that the next, likely Senate majority that will have solid enough control of its membership to pull off something like that would probably be the Republican conference, not the Democratic caucus. So that's a little worrisome. I don't want to necessarily give them that idea, but that's going to come up one day. Somebody's going to try that, and I don't know what the answer is going to be. You shouldn't be entitled to do that, right? But what's funny, of course, is the Republicans will say, if we tried that, they'd say, you can't do that. The president is only entitled to nominate people and only entitled to place people on the Supreme Court during the time that he's in office, not in the future beyond his term of office or her term of office. To which, of course, you could say, that's funny. It wasn't your position when Barack Obama was president. He was president and he made a nomination to the Supreme Court, and you said, no, the president doesn't have the power to fill up a vacancy on the Supreme Court while he's president, unless you say so. So the power appears to lie in the Senate. And now the Senate is saying, well, we're going to expand that power beyond this term. Because after all, it's a non-political place, so it really doesn't matter, does it? Because they're not political actors, according to you. So it shouldn't make a difference. These are all apolitical people, and they're just waiting in line. We just thought it would be prudent. Why have all that uncertainty out there when you could have a designated lineup and you'll know exactly who's going to succeed to the court? You won't know when, but you'll know in what order. I mean, that would be outrageous, but other things have been outrageous, like not considering a president's nominee to the Supreme Court for an entire year. That seemed like an outrageous thing to do at the time. I recommend they try it. And I don't see why it wouldn't work, whether with or without the expansion of the court. And in fact, if you wanted then afterwards to restore some semblance of order, such that the next president would be able to be responsible for the next nomination to a real vacancy on the Supreme Court as it happens, then you should just agree to the Expansion Act and seat those 6 and get them out of the queue so that the coast is clear for the next president to make their own nominations. I'm just saying it's compromise. You should go with it. Well, anyway, how about that? That was a bit of diversion. But, we're not done with the Equal Rights Amendment thing yet. Let's get back to that. Remember, again, the controversy that made us jump off of that was the 14th Amendment and the idea that some states decided that they were going to try to rescind their ratification, and the Congress decided, no, you're not allowed to rescind ratification. And apparently that has flown ever since. Under the precedent of the 14th Amendment, once 3/4 of states ratify, the amendment is part of the Constitution, said Chemerinsky. Leading constitutional scholar and former dean of Stanford Law School, Kathleen Sullivan, agrees. Article 5 speaks to ratification but not rescission. Article 5 describes a one-way ratchet. It does not provide for a two-way ratchet for going in and out of the process. The resolution from the supporters of the ERA declares, the Archivist of the United States has a statutory and ministerial duty to certify that a proposed amendment to the Constitution is valid and has become part of the Constitution once it is ratified by more than 3/4 of the states. The House resolution also speaks to the effective date of the ERA. Section 3 of the ERA states the amendment shall take effect 2 years after the 38th state ratifies, which was Virginia, on January 27, 2020. Therefore, the ERA is in effect as of today, that would be yesterday, January 27, 2022. Congratulations, everybody. We didn't even know it. Eleanor Smeal sees the resolution as important to marking the day the ERA has finally taken effect. According to the text of the ERA, it takes 2 years to take effect. We want it to mark it. We want people to understand that it is in effect. It has been ratified. It's important for the People's House to recognize that it's been ratified, said Smeal. But it's not necessary, and neither is a vote in the Senate, she continued. Everything that was done has been done. Okay, that's true. Everything that needs to be done has been done. Is what you probably meant. We already have the 2/3 vote in Congress. Nothing says you have to have approval in the Congress 2 times. ERA advocates have been preparing for this day. States are reviewing their statutes to see what changes they need to make in order to comply with the Equal Rights Amendment, said Jenkins. We're also working with corporations to create a universal code of equity. In our Corporate Equality Roundtable, we are creating a communications hub that gives equal voice and equal future to those who have long been marginalized. The House resolution emphasizes what the ERA will do. The Equal Rights Amendment provides a stronger constitutional basis for combating sex discrimination and provides Congress with more authority to enact laws that ensure gender equality. Under current Supreme Court precedent, sex discrimination receives only an intermediate level of scrutiny, meaning that many sex discriminatory laws and policies have been allowed, such as pregnancy discrimination and civil service veterans' preferences that disadvantage women. The ERA would not allow these forms of discrimination, says constitutional law scholar Professor Julie Suk of Fordham Law School and author of We the Women, the Unstoppable Mothers of the Equal Rights Amendment. The Supreme Court never actually overruled its cases saying that governmental pregnancy discrimination was not unconstitutional sex discrimination, so pregnancy is one subject on which I think the ERA could go beyond what the 14th Amendment has done, said Suk. Women have been at a disadvantage since this Constitution was written. The only way you can fix that is by fixing the Constitution, and that is what happened here, said Jenkins. Having fulfilled all the requirements, passage by Congress and ratified by 38 states, thank God D.C. didn't become a state, and I don't know whether that would throw it off by itself. You probably need 2 before you need to have more states ratified, but D.C. would have done it anyway. The women of America should not be held back anymore. We should proceed. I spend half my time in Congress fighting to hold on to what we already have, resisting efforts to roll back gains we've already made, said Maloney. With women's rights in the Constitution, we wouldn't be dependent on who's in Congress, who's on the Supreme Court, or who's in the White House. Our rights would be protected. Although, remember, again, it actually does kind of depend on who's on the Supreme Court, because they could say something like, no, this isn't a valid constitutional amendment after all, and I'm not sure where we would go after that. But anyway, yes, there's a bit more. You should read the end of it. I know there's only a little bit more, and I should give all the attention to it. But we digressed a couple of times and lost track of time. It's time for us to wrap things up, but I wanted to throw in one other thing here just before we end. Just a reminder that once again we face the weekend, and once again we have to worry that over the weekend Vladimir Putin may or may not invade Ukraine. Hot topic again, didn't happen last weekend, so hey, maybe it just won't be done after all, or maybe you don't even need to do invasions anymore to be able to get the kind of influence you need in Ukraine. I just wanted to remind everybody one more time, that once again, the audio tape that was made available of stupid idiot Kevin McCarthy making his lame-ass joke about him thinking that Putin paid Trump. And I agree, and it was a lame joke, but I actually agree with the premise of it. Everybody's eyes went to that. And that was the reason that conversation became famous. But I just want to remind everybody, the conversation actually begins on the subject of Ukraine. And in fact, the very first line of the transcript is talking about the fact that Kevin McCarthy had that day been visited by the then Prime Minister of Ukraine, who was there with the urgent message about what the Russians were up to in Ukraine and throughout the West, in fact. And that they had a huge international program of undermining democracies everywhere, and that they were underway in Ukraine. Not only had they invaded Ukraine and annexed the Crimean Peninsula, but that they were looking to undermine the current government of Ukraine and Ukraine's future, and perhaps even reabsorb them into the Russian Empire, the Russian Federation now, and that Kevin McCarthy missed the whole point of the thing. They had nothing to say. But the rest of the conversation is actually about Ukraine, and the mention by, I think, Kathy McMorris Rogers that we're not paying attention to what's really going on in Ukraine. But they gloss over it, and everybody made it famous for the joke about Trump being paid by Putin. Please pay attention. Please reread that section of the thing. And remember that as we begin to ponder, because Republicans are going to spend the week, whenever that invasion happens or whenever that annexation happens, they're going to try and lay it at Joe Biden's feet and say, Democrats lost Ukraine. Kevin McCarthy lost Ukraine. He was given a warning. He ignored it. He made a joke out of it and walked away. He's an idiot, and you should never let him out from underneath that responsibility.
Listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Well, how would you like to listen to Justice Putnam in the morning on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, now you get your chance. It's coming next. What's he got? All right, let's see. Oh, yes, more on the work of the Irish fishermen from County Cork coming up in their efforts to thwart Russian naval war games in Irish waters. Stay tuned for more.